Okay, so on to clouds. Now, clouds can be incredibly complex, and we could do a few weeks just on clouds. For the purposes of this course, I wanted to give a brief overview of the cloud node, the cloud noise node, and creating some custom clouds using VOPs. So in this video, we will create some cloud shapes, and we'll use these same techniques later to create some simple fog banks, use a box of volume to add some Atmos, and set up the shaders. Now, it's important to be quite specific and read up at least a little bit on the characteristics of the cloud you are creating. In this case, I want to create a cumulus cloud. These clouds live fairly low in the troposphere and tend to be puffy with some flat bases and a little advection. So if I bring up a reference here and take a look, we have these kind of more bulbous shapes at the top with a little breakup, and then these flat bases at the bottom. Okay, so to begin, we just have to create a basic shape. And I'm just going to use a few spheres here to get a general shape. I want a cloud that's wider at the base that comes in a little bit at the top. So I do have something here that I created before. It's just a few spheres that I have stacked on top of each other. And this just gives a general cloud shape. Okay, so the first node I want to look at is the cloud node. So let me just drop this in. And this will convert geometry into a volume. So in the volume tab, we have the uniform sampling divisions, which at the moment is sampling the max axis rather than the whole size of the geometry. And below we also have the sampling divisions. So higher values here create denser, higher fidelity volumes. I'll set this to 200, but if it's running a bit slow, I can reduce this and raise it up later. Just be aware that it can greatly affect the look of the final volume. In the density tab, we have this density multiplier, and this can also be controlled using this ramp here. We can also use this to tighten up the fall off between the higher and the lower density parts in the volume, and we can also control the density within the shader. And we'll take a look at that a bit later. So the scatter shapes tab is very important, and it adds the secondary shapes on top of the cloud. So if I just press fill source, you can see what we get here. And it works for the most part. There's maybe a little too many. Let me just boost up the size here and reduce the multiplier. Something like this. Nice. So this changes the size of the spheres that are scattered on top. The multiplier, which decides how many we get here. And we have some noise controls, which also let us change the shape a little here. Below this, we have the secondary shapes, and this lets us add a little bit more on top. So let me just tick this. And you can see we start to get some more shapes just on top. Now we don't have enough. Let me just boost this up so we get some more. And increase the size a little. And also the iterations, just to make sure we get a lot more than what we have here. Okay. So we have the same multiplier and size settings and the same noise settings as above. And below this, we have the up vector fall off. So this just changes how much we have at the bottom versus the top. For instance, if I reduce the bias, you can see we get a bit more at the bottom. Or if I increase the bias, they start to point more towards the top. Cool. And this is all based on the up vector. Both the billow and the density offsets just change the distance between the points. So if I increase this, you can see what happens. Let me just undo this. And below this, we have some fall-offs that we can apply based on the various profiles, the Y, the X, and the Z. Okay, so the final tab here, and it's very important for cumulus clouds, is the flatten tab. And this just lets us flatten the bottom or the top, depending on what we need. So let me just lift up the bottom here, and then increase the bottom scale just to flatten it off. Okay, so next up we have the cloud noise node. And you can see straight away we get some decent shapes already on the surface. So we have some very handy settings here that we can change. We have the amplitude that we can up. Let me just increase this a bit. We have the octave, so we can increase the recursions and the element scale. So the reason I'm increasing this here is because I want to add the higher frequency noise using the advection. So let me just lift this up a little bit more. And increase the roughness. We also have this up vector section again, and it just removes it more from the bottom than the top. Cool. So let's increase the advect noise, and this just adds that typical cloud noise that you see. Increase the size some. And the roughness again. Maybe a little too big. That's better. So now we get the typical cloud forms within the cloud, and we also get some nice breakup at the edges here. If there are areas with too much noise, sometimes you see areas within clouds that are a little bit more flat than others. We do have the option to paint out some of these areas. So if we plug in the geometry that we used here, and then add an attribute paint node, and I'll just change this to noise mask. And just paint out the areas, or paint in the areas that I want the noise. And now within the cloud noise, if I activate this and rename this noise mask, you can see the noise comes back where we painted it. Cool. I'll just disconnect this for now. Oh, and deactivate the noise mask. Another simple way to create some cloud noise is using a simple VOP. So I will throw down a new node and use the cloud node again to convert it to a volume and flatten the base. Let me just grab this one maybe. I'll increase the divisions again. And now add a cloud noise. just to get that generic cloud texture in there. And next I want to break this up using a VOP. So let me just add a VOP, a volume VOP. And jump inside. And you can see we have the density input and the density output here. And I just want to break this up using an AA noise. So let me just drop this down. And take the position. And just plug this straight in. You can see what we get here. We get some cloud shapes in here, and we just want to use a fit range to increase the density. We can go higher than 1. Let's boost this right up and increase the contrast. And finally, I just want to change the frequency of this guy. And then try and find a nice shape. So what we can get here is we can get some very cloud-like shapes just using the AA noise within the VOP. And what we can do with this is we can merge it in with our current cloud. Just to add a little bit more interest. Cool, so this helps add a little bit of directionality to the cloud, so it looks like it's coming from right to left. Okay, so that's all I wanted to look at in this video, and in the next one we can take a look at some cirrus clouds and using a similar technique to look at the environment atmos. Thanks.